like a church movie, sometimes there's a little bit of a hesitation of like, is it going to be any good? I've been wrestling with what to say about this movie for days and days. Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. I recently watched the movie Cabrini. It is a historical, biopic that's about the life of Saint Francis Xavier Cabrini. And so it's a story of how she leaves Italy and she comes to the New World, right? She comes to the United States to serve primarily the underserved Italian immigrant population in Manhattan originally. At that time in the United States, Italians were the most recent wave of immigrants. And so they were at the bottom of the heap. So she first started an orphanage. And then there's a scene where they're going to make uniforms for the children. And one of the sisters comes to Mother Cabrini and says, well, we have this kind of fabric, which is less expensive. We can get more of it. Or this kind of fabric, which is more expensive, but much nicer. And Mother Cabrini says, we're going to get the more expensive fabric because these children need to know that they matter. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but we're going to reveal to them by how we treat them, how we feed them, how we clothe them, that they're deserving of dignity, that they have dignity, and they're deserving of respect. And there's something about that's so Catholic at its core. So we're going to give the best we can to every person around us. We're going to give our very best to God. And that was something that came across that, in serving the poor, serving the underprivileged, we're not going to give them our scraps. We're going to give them the very best we can afford to give them. And that was something it hit my heart. It was just really, really powerful. But there's something really cool about watching people desperate to come to this country, not just because they wanted a new start, not just because they wanted a new opportunity, but because they believed in this idea called America. There are a lot of things that built this country. Industrialization that built this country, farming that built this country. We have westward expansion that builds this country. But when it comes to what civilized this country, it was families, and it was the church. Here is Mother Cabrini, and she came to this country, and she brought orphanages to care for those who were not cared for. They built hospitals to care for the sick, school system to care for those who were uneducated. Also, this movie is a great reminder of this piece that I think is so powerful and so important for us not to forget. As she comes to serve the Italian immigrants, by this point, the Irish immigrants had already kind of been established a little bit. By this point, Jewish immigrants had been established a bit. At this point, English and Scottish and all those other immigrants have been kind of settled, at least in the East Coast. And so here are these people. And there's a scene that's, as Mother Cabrini goes to the next generation, second or third generation of immigrants, and says, okay, you're established right now. But remember when your parents and grandparents got here, how they were kicked to the side. Remember how they were pushed to the fringes of society. That's what's happening with my people now. That's what's happening with these Italians who come here to be Americans. And she said, don't forget, and this is one of the things for all of us, is just not just when it comes to life, when it comes to our countries, but when it comes to where we sit, when it comes to who we sit with. To not forget that, just because I have a place to sit at the table, just because I'm taken care of, that doesn't mean that everyone's taken care of. It doesn't mean that everyone has a place to sit. As she was talking to those people, the second, third, fourth generation, said, you have your place now. You have your homes now. You have your jobs, careers, whatever. You're established now. You have your place at the table. Don't forget that there are people who don't have a place yet. And in this movie, Cabrini, it reveals that. It reveals that sometimes we can get into that mindset that, I'm taken care of. I don't need to be looking around to ask the question, who else needs to be taken care of? Because I'm okay. Mother Cabrini is a great example of someone who said, you might be taken care of, but there are people who aren't. You have your seat at the table. Who is still looking for a seat?
Maybe we can group the first few together. So the first three are feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked. How do you read these three?
Very basic needs of people that have to be met. I lived for 6 years, as you well know, in Santa Barbara, California, one of the most, exclusive parts of the world. Oprah lives there, Montecito, Prince Harry lives there, Kevin Costner, movie stars live there. I lived, 15 minutes from where they live. I didn't live in a fancy schmancy neighborhood, but Santa Barbara. But 10 minutes from my house in Santa Barbara, maybe less than that, there were people who were hungry and thirsty and on a chronic basis. So don't think that the hungry and thirsty and those who need decent clothing are just in some distant, Asian or African country. They are, no matter where you're hearing me, they are within 10 minutes of you. So what are you doing to help them? Now, homeless shelters and soup kitchens, and great. Believe me, there's one not far from you. I don't care where you are. There's one not far from you. Go, help out. Give money to it. Yes, indeed. Be a presence at a place like that. Yes, vote in accord with some of these principles. Sure, do all those things. But I like the direct involvement, that you personally kind of getting your hands dirty, so to speak. You get involved in these activities. I said the closet is a very interesting place for some spiritual work. What I meant was, you go into your closet and trust me, you're going to find all kinds of things in there that you don't wear, that you haven't worn in ages. There's a shirt. Why is that still here? I haven't worn a thing in 3 years. Well, that's a very good sign that it's time to give that away. The closet thing again is interesting. I think I got that idea from, it's been attributed to both John Chrysostom and to St. Ambrose, the line that if you've got 2 shirts in your closet, one belongs to you, the other belongs to the man who has no shirt. Talk about a quote that takes your breath away, right? If you let that one sink in.
So those are the first 3 of the corporal works of mercy:
Yeah.
feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked. The 4th one is visiting the imprisoned.
Yeah.
Is this one we should take literally, that
Yeah.
all Christians should be going to prisons and visiting prisoners?
Yes. I've many times quoted Johnny Cash, one of my musical heroes, but who played in prisons all the time. Famously, the Folsom prison and all that. And he was asked why he did that, and his answer was, well, because I'm a Christian. He broadened it to, there are a lot of prisons, aren't there? Elderly people that are kind of imprisoned in their own home. Sick people that can be imprisoned on their own bed. People imprisoned by addictions. People imprisoned by their fears. Imprisoned by old hatreds they can't get rid of. There's a lot of forms of incarceration. And so do we visit, in a liberating way, those who are in prison? Maybe think about that when you, again, I like your idea, Brandon, of a way of examining your conscience. I find that very helpful when you go to confession, so that you don't just kind of repeat the same formulas over and over again, but you really examine your conscience. One way to do it is with the deadly sins or with the 10 Commandments, but this is not a bad way either. How have I done or not done the corporal and spiritual works? So as you're approaching your day, all right, who are imprisoned people that I'm likely to meet today, or that I should go to meet today and visit? It's a good question.
I think there's a lot of us at Word on Fire whom you've counseled and helped over the years. And I know one bit of advice you often give to somebody who's really struggling in a dark period, whether because of depression or doubt or sin, or they're just going through something tough. And a bit of advice you regularly give is go out and do
Yes.
an act of love.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
use these as your reference. Why
Yeah.
is that the right path to take?
I've been saying that for years because I preach that to myself too. Look, if the Lord is right about this, that you'll know that you're my disciples by your love. God is love. The goal of life is union with God, and therefore we have our answer. That's the answer. And I think it's proven experientially over and over again that when you're preoccupied, when you're afraid, you're anxious, you're depressed, there's a kind of, as Augustine said, right, incurvatus in se, you've caved in around yourself. Go out. Go out. And not just to find entertainment. Go out in an attitude of love, and you'll break free of this kind of black hole quality. That's, I think, our metaphor for incurvatus in se would be a black hole that just draws everything into itself. To break free from that is to engage even in the simplest act of love. It doesn't have to be Mother Teresa, but I mean, just how about write a note to someone that you haven't talked to for a while that you suspect probably could use a word of encouragement. Offer a compliment to someone who needs it, right? help a kid who's struggling with his or her studies in school. Bake cookies and give them out. I mean, do anything that will break you free of the black hole tendency of sin. That's what I mean. And so when people write to me, they do sometimes saying just that, like, I'm just lost. I'm in a black depression, you know. And I don't know the person well enough to be giving like really good psychological or counseling kind of advice. But I always say that, all right, step one, perform the simplest act of love today. And then tomorrow, do another one. And the next day, maybe do 2 acts of love, you know. And it can't do any harm. The person probably needs, I know needs more, personal attention and maybe psychological counseling and medication even, who knows? And nothing wrong with any of that. But as step one, perform the simplest act of love. And I think you'll find a way out of that hell.
Well, the 5th corporal work of mercy is shelter the homeless. And it's easy to think of Dorothy Day. Once again, she and Peter Morin founded these houses of hospitality where they would regularly welcome people off the street to sleep as long as they needed to. What does that mean for the rest of us who maybe aren't in a position to, literally welcome homeless people into our homes? Or is that what the church is driving at here?
Well, at the limit, I think. But look, everyone knows in our country it's worsened enormously in the course of my lifetime, the homelessness problem. My years in LA, I was there for 6 years, and it was appreciably worse. When I arrived in LA, and even in Santa Barbara, when I arrived there, and then 6 years later, it was appreciably worse. Go up the coast in California, San Francisco, and other places. Homelessness here in Rochester, Minnesota, which is brutal as the winter has now arrived, So yeah, to be aware of that problem and do something. Now that might be, in your contributions, in your political commitments, but yeah, that you do something to provide shelter. Now, maybe it's working in a homeless shelter. Maybe it's contributing to a homeless shelter. So different ways you could do it. But that problem has only gotten worse, hasn't it, in our time?
All right, let's move to the 6th corporal work of mercy, which is visiting the sick. How should we understand that?
Something everyone can do from oldest to youngest, it seems to me. We all know someone who's sick. In the hospital, in a hospice care, in nursing care, someone who just has a bad case of the flu and they're in bed. Everyone, I bet, listen to me right now, knows somebody who's sick and could stand to visit. When I was doing parish work, Brandon, many years ago, I was very devoted to this. And not that I found it easy, I didn't. The prospect of getting in the car and driving to a hospital and spending a couple of hours, visiting parishioners. But gosh, I always, without exception, came back from those visits full of joy. I always thought of the psalm. They went out full of tears, carrying seed for the sowing. They come back full of songs, carrying their sheaves. That's what it was like for me when I was go to the hospital to visit parishioners, is I kind of went out with tears, like with some resistance. But I always came back laughing, always came back with a song, right? Do it. Visit people who are sick. We all know somebody. So it's, again, concrete. Hard to do, yeah, sometimes. Annoying, difficult, yeah, but do it. Visit the sick.
I like how this corporal work of mercy is not heal the sick,
right,
not make them feel better, but visit
them.
Why? What about visiting is important?
This is an act of love, isn't it? It's being with someone. It's willing the good of the other. As I've come just to be with you.
As we wrap up here, I wanted to ask one more question about these corporal works in relation to families. Bouncing off something you said just a little bit earlier is, I talk to a lot of mothers and fathers with lots of kids, and they already feel overwhelmed thinking of adding all these extra corporal works of mercy to what they're doing. But I know for me, there was once a priest who impressed upon me the need to practice these within the family, and how parents are naturally already doing at least six of these things every day.
Feed the hungry. Think of all the times, Brandon, you Kathleen, have fed your children and give them a drink when they're
most days.
well, yeah, a few days you just leave them to starve. No, so I mean, right, and clothe the naked. Well, look, how many babies have you brought home, naked from the hospital? And from that moment on, you've been clothing them. So yes, that's absolutely right. And even visit the imprisoned. Not that your kids are in prison, but they'll get imprisoned by all kinds of their fears or their anxieties or whatever. Visit the sick. Are you kidding? Parents are always at the bedside of sick kids, right? So yeah, that's absolutely right. It doesn't have to be, the dramatic Dorothy Day, Mother Teresa expression, but it can be very everyday. Absolutely.
Last two things. If there's one critique I have of this movie, it is that there should be more God. What I mean by that is Mother Cabrini was a force, right? She had a lot of oomph, a lot of verve. She had a lot of vim and vigor. She had a lot of drive, and she got a lot of things done. But we know as Catholics that that's not why she's a saint. That's not why she really was able to accomplish all these things. It was because of the grace of God working in her. If there's anything that's missing from the movie, it is the reality, the presence, the working, the action of God, and Mother Cabrini's deep, profound trust in him at all times. Sometimes in the movie, she comes across as kind of a 19th century girl boss who just get it done on her own power. Yet, Mother Cabrini's own life demonstrates, she's like, I actually am weak. But when I'm weak, he is strong. Her actual life points to Jesus. The movie, it could have emphasized the presence of Christ, the reality of the Holy Spirit, the fact that she was reliant upon him in everything, could emphasize that more. This is not a church movie. This is a mainstream film that's about one of our own, right? This is a mainstream film that's about a Catholic saint. Last thing, I don't know how more to describe this movie other than this. I was able to screen it right on my computer. And about a quarter of the way in, I took my computer and brought it into our chapel. I said, I want to watch this movie. I want to experience this movie in the presence of Jesus. And then for the next 3/4 of the movie, I just cried. And I was like, why am I crying? Because, there's not like there's this massive conflict that resolves. It's not necessarily like this massive scenes of resolution that makes us cry in other movies. But I just found myself weeping for most of the movie. And I don't actually know why. But I knew I needed to say that. And you might go to the movie and have completely dry eyes, like, where's the part that Father Mike cried at? Like, I just kept weeping, knowing all this goodness, all this truth. This is a real story about a real saint who is your sister and my sister, your mother and my mother, Mother Cabrini. I just know that I felt something in my heart. And it wasn't like overly dramatic. It wasn't because of the great soundtrack that just, tugged at my heartstrings. It was just something about the power and beauty of the simple life of this woman. Again, our sister and our mother. So, I give it a thumbs up, and I hope that if you go see the movie Cabrini, that you allow the Lord to speak to your heart, and that he also touches your heart like he touched mine. Anyways, that's all I got for today. For all of us here at Central Presents, my name is Father Mike. God bless.